The whole point of tariffs was to bring manufacturing back to the US. For 7 months, manufacturers in total cut jobs by nearly 70,000. That is not screaming confidence. That is not screaming tariffs are adding to US production. I am not overly optimistic about the freight side of things. These tariffs, we have not seen anywhere close to the full impact of the tariffs.
Welcome, everyone, to Stay in Your Lane podcast. I'm your host today, John Mahle, brought to you by Triple T Transport. Happy New Year, Bob. Thank you for being on. This is multiple years in a row you've started the year off with us. Bob Costello. I'd go over your title, but it's much too much. We only have 15 minutes. So Bob's with the ATA, Chief Economist. You do cross-border, you do tariffs. You do so much, and I don't know how you keep it all straight. With us today also is our favorite podcast contributor, Joe Lombardo, E. Avenue and Associates. Joe's been in the business for 40-some years now, Joe?
Yeah, probably closer to 50.
All right, well, almost 50 years. So veteran crew here. I'm humbled to be with them. Happy New Year again, Bob. Joe, Happy New Year. Tell us what to expect. What do you see, Bob?
Well, Happy New Year to both of you. Um, it's been interesting times, right? 2025 was tough. A lot of different moving parts. I mean, like more than I've been doing this, not like you, Joe. I've been quite in it, but I've been at ATA now. I think I'm going on to my 29th year. So I've seen a lot of cycles too. Nothing quite like this. They're all a little different. This one's very different, right? Um, so I think there's some interesting things that could transpire this year on what we're seeing. I guess bottom line, guys, I've been telling my members, um, demand-based recoveries are easy, meaning freight just starts to go up, right? And that's good. That's easy. Supply-based recoveries are difficult. And I think that's where we are, right? So it's not like it's impossible. And in fact, I think you're seeing a little bit of that now in the market, but it just understand that's a longer process. I think it's been going on for a while. We've talked about this the last summer, and now you have some government policy changes that I think are adding to that as well. So that's good. Just if freight were to surge, which I don't think it will, that would be much easier, right? That would be the easy thing that to happen.
Wow. Said a lot there in a few words, Bob. Let's touch on that. So we're seeing shipping volumes aren't high overall. We're not. I wouldn't turn around and say the economy is doing well and booming, right? So
Yeah.
we take that part of the equation, and then we say, hey, we're starting to see capacity crunches in areas, which we haven't seen. And I think a lot of the time people think when things are easy that they're just going to stay that way, right? And I don't think this is anything like we'd seen in the past where, there's tons of orders. How do we get it done scenario? We had a ton of surge capacity in the market through the last cycle, but that's pretty much purging itself between policy and attrition. So the question I think is on everybody's mind is 2026 going to be a better year for trucking?
So there's a lot to unwrap there, right? And I think it's all good points. First of all, the economy is not in a recession, but let's be very clear: the goods side of the economy is not strong, right? And in fact, parts of it, I would argue, are in a recession still. Okay. You got construction activity still very weak. I know the Fed's cutting interest rates. We expect another cut or two. But it's still soft. Manufacturing's not strong at all, right? I mean, what was I get when I'm out speaking, I have fleets come up to me and go, Bob, but the whole point of tariffs was to bring manufacturing back to the US. Well, the government data has been delayed because of the shutdown, but we had for 7 months manufacturers in total cut jobs by nearly 70,000. That is not screaming confidence. That is not screaming tariffs are adding to US production, right? And that's because 50% or roughly 50% of what we import into the US are not finished goods, but semi-finished goods and parts for our manufacturing process. And so when those things have higher prices on them, that's going to hurt US manufacturers. The consumer is hanging in there, but understand this is what we call the K-shaped economy, right? There's a group of consumers, a subset of them that are doing quite well. That's about your top 20% of households, income-wise. The other 80%, it's tough out there. And because, we have some recent inflation data that shows that maybe it leveled off, although we skipped a month, so that gets a little dicey on exactly how all that the data works with that. But let's just say inflation's not, really is elevated. Prices remain high, and that's pinching some consumers, not all. There's a group of consumers that are doing quite well. So you add it all up, guys, and demand is not really there. Okay, at least not yet. So what to your point, why are things getting a little bit better? And that has to do with the supply side. And again, as I said early on, supply recoveries are more difficult, but not impossible. So it takes time. So we've seen before sort of this there in 2025, we definitely saw some, it was a sort of a dribble of supply whittling away for a while. And then some of the things around non-domiciled CDLs, around English language provisions, and now the government and by the way, this is something ATA has been requesting for a while, even in the previous administration, cracking down on cabotage or what is termed cabotage. It's not actually, it's a lot of times it's US fleets hiring Mexican drivers to do point to point in the US. So it's not technically cabotage, but we often refer to it as cabotage. But it's still illegal, right? It is illegal. So you add it all up, guys, and I think between companies still under a lot of pressure, debt piling up, and so forth, plus these changes with the government, I think that's why you're starting to see some improvement around, maybe the pendulum is swinging a bit back towards motor carriers. We'll have to see how long it takes. Again, if it was all of a sudden if freight took off, I'd be like, oh, this thing's going to flip like that, right? But being that it's a supply-driven one, it could take a little longer.
Well, to your point, that leads me right into my next question or my next statement to try and understand. We agree that we see this as a supply side drive because shipping volumes aren't up. We've seen the market continue to purge and drive capacity out through 25. This is twofold because I was watching some information the past week or two showing truck production numbers being down, trucks coming out of the market every month. And at some point in time, as this transitions on a supply-driven curve, then we're going to be back at the days where truck manufacturers have to hire and train and ramp up and start producing more trucks and trailers also. That's not a slow recovery. That's normally 18 months for most to get back to even when they've got production down as low as it's supposed to be this year. It was this year and is supposed to be next year. So how do you see that impacting this supply-driven curve? Because I don't know that we're going to be in a position to just solve it as easy as we did through the COVID push with just revenue. I don't know that that's going to be the solution.
No, you bring up a good point, and something I should have mentioned when I was talking about supply, and that is we are well below replacement rates in terms of truck production, right?
Yep.
So that means every month on net, we will see a shrinking of truck capacity simply because we're not keeping up with replacement rates. I can't even tell you guys the number of fleets that I have spoken to that through the budgeting process last fall that told me they're either going low buy or no buy in 2026. And the reason for that is the cumulative pricing they have seen on new Class 8 tractors, right? For a while, it was around environmental regulations. And then starting November 1st of last year, it was around this 25% tariff on non-US content in trucks being imported from Mexico. Because that's really the only place we're importing Class 8 tractors from. Well, okay, so if you take 25%, we think I've talked to the association that represents the manufacturers in Mexico. And so we think about 50%, or they tell me about 50% of the content is US content. So let's take a 25% tariff on 50% of the content for coming into the US. You're still talking, 10,000 plus per truck,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah, oh,
And,
yeah,
and easily.
yep.
So, and then throw FET on that and so forth. I talked to one fleet last fall in the budgeting process that said they normally buy 200 trucks a year for replacements. And I said, well, how many are you going to buy in 2026? And they said, we're budgeting to buy zero, right? I mean, because they did the math. And to them, the math was, yes, our maintenance costs go up, okay? And we can't do this forever. But in the
Right.
near term, we can do it, right? Yes, we'll spend more on maintenance, but we won't buy any new trucks. And so to your point, that means, whether it's a no buy by some fleets or a low buy, and I can tell you the manufacturers and others are projecting very low truck sales in 2026. That also is going to hurt supply. So then, to your point, at some point, right, you're gonna need more supply. I don't know exactly when that might be.
Was there four to
But
5,000 trucks a month coming out of the market?
so I don't know. I don't really. I leave that to FTR and ACT and stuff to look at that stuff. But it's not insignificant, right? And
Right.
we see it actually in even in a lot of different numbers, like that. Not only the truck numbers, but also in like employee driver numbers and so forth. So it's down. So you add it all up eventually, and then it's not easy. To your point earlier, when that point comes, again, is that a second half of 2026 right thing or what? It's not going to be like, oh, let's just turn on the spigot and get more capacity in here to get some of this stuff moved. So we'll have to see, but it is an interesting situation.
Well, and I think the tariffs, to your point, they complicate it. So it'll be a different navigation to recover. COVID was different. It was demand driven, and with the whole situation, there was money to work with. There were sales. You could make it work, right? This is different because this is driven from the backside on the supply end. I would have to think that with the White House needing to trying to win midterms, they're going to do what they can to get the economy going as much as they can in 26. I would plan for that is what I'm planning for. But then you say, hey, wait a minute, we're in 25. We just finished 25, and we saw tender rejection go up. We started to see a squeeze when there wasn't volume, right? There isn't volume. So how difficult is this navigation going to be through 26? Because I don't know that the shippers really recognize the fact that the carriers haven't been profitable for years at a level where they can maintain or stay even. They're actually shrinking at some level.
Without
Are
a
you,
doubt. Yeah. No, I
you
agree with that. And I'm not at this where we sit today. I am not overly optimistic about the freight side of things. Okay. I think, these tariffs, we have not seen anywhere close to the full impact of the tariff.